What happens when a boring professional business user-oriented cell phone company makes a smartphone targeted at the masses? I'm pretty sure that's when you get the BlackBerry Pearl. In 2006, BlackBerry was in a tight spot. Sure, they were popular and their handsets had sold well, but their primary customers had been professionals and business users who appreciated the full QWERTY keyboard and email features. The problem with that is, that's a pretty targeted demographic and it was shrinking fast. Other cell phones were being made that had similar functionality and, you know, actually fit in a pocket. So it was time for BlackBerry to make a device that could appeal to everyone. And against all odds, they did it very well. The Pearl's first most obvious feature was its smaller, cleaner design. This wasn't BlackBerry's first attempt to slim down the 7230. The 7100 made similar design advances, but still looked different. The Pearl, or BlackBerry 8100, on the other hand, at least from a distance, looks like just any slim, sleek little cell phone from 2006, which attracted more everyday users compared to the previously unwieldy BlackBerries. Despite the cleaner, less serious-looking design, the Pearl didn't compromise on BlackBerry's signature features like advanced security and mobile email, and the UI is also laid out in a very similar way, which makes it easy for previous BlackBerry device owners to upgrade without the hassle of relearning the basics. But it also means the Pearl feels a little underwhelming. While this technically is a smartphone, there's no built-in Wi-Fi, no instant messaging, so really, besides an MP3 player, there's almost nothing new here compared to previous BlackBerry models. Sure, this was entirely acceptable for 2006 standards, but you could definitely do better. The Pearl's 1.3 megapixel camera, for example, is pretty unremarkable. There's no autofocus here, and photos are mostly pale and grainy. There's also pretty much nothing in terms of camera features, with photo quality and white balance being the only adjustments here. There's also no video recording here, which wasn't really a deal breaker at the time. This kind of minimalism is kind of nice though. If you were picking one of these up just for BlackBerry's famous email and security features, you probably weren't the kind of customer that was super into using your cell phone as a camcorder. In fact, the lack of camera features is one of the many examples that shows us how determined BlackBerry was to stay in their corner and not branch out too much into the world of entertainment and media like most other phone companies were doing. The Pearl, despite its sleeker form factor and slightly more polished software, still feels like a functional tool more than a typical fun feature-focused smartphone. Sure, we've got Brick Breaker here, but yeah, by 2006 we had moved on from this game. And other companies were making smartphone technology advancements that far outclassed the Pearl. BlackBerry's answer to where all their technology advancement budget went, well, that would be SHType. Now, BlackBerry had a bit of a dilemma when trying to slim down their old monster brick of a phone. One of the main advantages to even owning a BlackBerry device came in the form of a full keyboard in lieu of a standard old numpad you got on most phones at the time. Problem was, the slimmer size of the Pearl left little room for a comfortable keyboard, so they had to come up with a solution. What they came up with was SHType, which could be summarized as the perfect compromise between a full keyboard and a traditional keypad. It split letters up into groups of 2 instead of 3, theoretically cutting typing time almost in half. It wasn't just hardware though. SHType had its own clever software, also called SHType, which was BlackBerry's own version of T9 Word. Since there are fewer letters per key to guess, SHType is much more quick and accurate than T9 Word, and it just feels more natural. That all sounds great, and yes, it's about the best they could have done with the space constraints they were working with here, but in practice, it takes some learning to get used to it. And it's just not going to properly replace a real keyboard. This was doubtlessly one of the biggest issues for anyone upgrading from previous BlackBerry devices. This keyboard's not the only place on the Pearl where you'll find buttons. Up top there's a silence toggle button that also serves as a handy screen wake and lock key. On either side of the phone you will also find what BlackBerry called convenience keys. These buttons, both with their own distinct features, are fully customizable to open an app or perform some kind of task. You can even have a dedicated brick breaker button. Up front right below the display is this glowing trackball thing that replaces the jog wheel found on older BlackBerry devices. I guess this is where the Pearl gets its name. The Pearl's navigational Pearl is actually a super intuitive way to navigate around the UI, but at the same time, it's a little bit cumbersome. Just look how it jumps around when playing the only game available to the Pearl. I'm not sure if it was like this when new, so I can't judge too harshly, but if it was, yeah, not great. The rest of the buttons are pretty straightforward, so let's move on to some media features. Despite the disappointing lack of exciting media features, the Pearl actually has a pretty underrated speaker. Put some music on a micro SD card and drop it in the Pearl, this thing actually turns into a good little MP3 player. If you remove the back and look at the upper left side of the phone, you'll be able to see its 15mm speaker with a channel that sends audio out the top of the phone, so setting on its back will have no effect on the audio. It is a cool idea, but obviously this is still a back-facing speaker, so removing the back and leaving the phone face down gives optimal audio quality. If you want to use headphones with the Pearl, you've got very few options, unfortunately. There's no 3.5mm headphone jack, you just get a 2.5mm headphone jack because that was the standard on most phones at the time. You also can't connect Bluetooth headphones either because that was just not really much of a thing yet. Oh, and you can also watch videos stored on an SD card on the Pearl, but that's about it. It was clear BlackBerry was trying to move towards appealing to the average consumer, but it's almost like they were afraid to go too far in that direction. While the Pearl did well in terms of sales, that was mostly thanks to BlackBerry's already strong reputation, and carriers heavily pushing it in the US. Reviewers at that time weren't so optimistic, however, noting the unfortunate lack of some features, making the Pearl feel less like an actual smartphone than some of its competitors. BlackBerry did listen to some of these complaints and addressed them in the BlackBerry Pearl 8130. The 8130 came in more color options and sported a slightly more attractive design. More importantly, the 8130 got an upgraded camera with video recording capability, a second speaker, a 3.5mm headphone jack, 3G network connectivity, GPS, among other hardware and software improvements. On top of that, the 8130 was competitively priced and included built-in support for TV and music streaming services from Sprint and Verizon. BlackBerry continued developing the Pearl line for several more years and even launched their first flip phone, the Pearl Flip. In mid-2010, they launched the 9100 series, the last line of Pearl devices before it was discontinued. It was of course much slimmer and sleeker than the earlier models, but by then, the Pearl was irrelevant and BlackBerry had other problems to worry about. It feels like the Pearl was always a step or two behind the competition, not that it was a bad phone, it just existed in the shadow of its competitors and never really felt truly revolutionary. Unfortunately, BlackBerry never learned from their mistakes and continued creating devices that, like the Pearl, were behind from day one. If we just ignore the technological advancements though and focus on how well the Pearl did in sales, this device was clearly a success, with 15 million handsets sold during its lifespan. This impressive number helped the Pearl land a spot in the top 100 best-selling mobile phones of all time. So now we ask the question, did it deserve its short-lived popularity? Honestly, I'd say yes. As frustrating as it is when companies don't take advantage of a product's possible potential, I can understand BlackBerry's hesitancy to go full-spec multimedia monster with this thing. They had built up such a strong identity and dedicated fan base, it's no wonder they didn't want to risk losing that kind of support. But with so many companies like Nokia, Motorola, Samsung, and LG on all sides offering some incredibly competitive devices, it's no surprise BlackBerry lost the fight. Their failure to evolve and adapt to the quickly changing mobile phone world caused one of the biggest mobile phone manufacturers of all time to sizzle out of existence. The Pearl, in my own and probably many other people's opinion, is a BlackBerry icon, a device that even today stands next to the Motorola Razr and Nokia 1100. Being such an important device in mobile tech history, it's fitting that this is the first BlackBerry device to get featured on my channel. That being said, this is not the last time you're going to see a BlackBerry on my channel. If you have any video suggestions for a device you'd like to see next, please leave them in the comments below and it might just happen. As always, thank you for watching this video. If you like what you see here, subscribe so you don't miss another video. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.